I'm so happy the weather cooperated. It's a great day to be alive, isn't it? And, that's really why we're all here. I'm so grateful to all of you for covering this, and to my colleagues and my advocates, and to Fred Stokes, who you're going to meet in a couple of minutes, for sharing his own personal story. 3 months ago, as many of you may know, I went to the House floor and delivered a floor speech about the loss of my life partner, Kerry Acker. He had died by suicide 1 month before, on May 25th. In the months since then, I have received what can only be described as an outpouring of messages from constituents in my community and people across the country. I've heard from people who lost someone, a son, a daughter, a spouse, a sibling, a friend, people who were almost lost to suicide themselves, and mental health professionals and advocates, all of whom were committed and are committed to taking suicide prevention and mental health issues out of the darkness and into the light. The overwhelming reaction I have received has only underscored the scale of the crisis we face. Many people here already know the statistics. In 2017, there were an estimated 1.4 million people who attempted suicide, and 47,173 of them succeeded at that act, including 20 military veterans every single day. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in our country overall, and it's the second leading cause of death among people between the ages of 10 and 34. Suicide deaths overall have risen by 30% in the last 2 decades. The numbers are just beyond belief. Behind these numbers are the individual experiences of sons, daughters, spouses, brothers, sisters, cousins, friends, co-workers. Behind these numbers are family and friends enduring extraordinary heartache and grief, many of whom who do not have access to adequate resources because millions of Americans remain either uninsured or underinsured when it comes to mental health. That's why I am introducing today the Greater Mental Health Access Act to help people who have been affected by suicide get the mental health care that they need. My bill would make the suicide of a loved one a qualifying life event, allowing those who are affected to enroll immediately in a plan that covers mental health services at any time. My bill would also provide a new grant program to provide funding for local nonprofits, religious institutions, clinics, hospitals, and other organizations to deliver or coordinate mental health services to affected families and friends following a suicide or a suicide attempt. While this crisis touches people of all backgrounds and walks of life, young people are also among those who are most at risk. That's why I'm also introducing the Enhanced Mental Health and Suicide Prevention through Campus Planning Act to help fill the gap in unmet mental health needs of college students by requiring the Department of Education to coordinate with the HHS Secretary to encourage institutions of higher education to develop and implement comprehensive mental health and suicide prevention plans. I'm also working to ensure that suicide prevention is included in vital legislation where it is often overlooked, which is why I made sure that we included an amendment to my bill to reauthorize the Older Americans Act that added screening for suicide to the disease prevention and health promotion services in the new Dignity and Aging Act that was just passed by Education and Labor unanimously this week. In the coming weeks and months, I am going to be working as hard as I can to get these critical pieces of legislation passed. As I said to Fred Stokes, I didn't expect to be here at this moment in time, but we go where the path of life leads us, and this is where it has led me. I am going to continue to use events like the roundtable that we are having shortly after this press conference to make sure that we truly break the stigma around mental health issues and suicide. This effort falls on all of us, elected officials, activists, advocates, community leaders, members of the media. And a lot of people are really hurting across our country. A lot of people don't feel heard. We need to amplify their voices. We need to be there for them. I often say that I can only make sense of losing my life partner if I can save other people's lives. And just as important, if I can save another family from going through what my family and Carrie's family have gone through over the past few months. I'm going to stay on it, and I'm asking all of you to join me in that effort and to shed light on it. I'm going to hand it over now to the one and only Fred Stokes. Fred is a Super Bowl champion who has turned his platform into a force for good with his podcast on coping with life's never-ending challenges. Thank you so much for being here and for your willingness to share this story.
Thank you. Well, Congresswoman, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I'm humbled and I'm grateful that, as she said, that our paths are crossed. We never know where the path of life may lead us, and sometimes we can invite people into our world just because that's who we want to be a part of. But our connection happened by circumstance or happenstance. As I came into my home one evening from being on the road, my wife actually saw her in the middle of her presentation, her speaking, emotionally sharing her story. And I just happened to see that. Had it been 30 seconds prior or a minute later, I would have missed that. And so I feel that I'm here because of purpose. And yes, I have my own story. Several years ago, many years ago, I could have not been here because I was personally confronted and had a challenge of taking my own life. I've got 3 boys. And prior to that, my third son, Luke Frazier Stokes, who's now 23 years old, it was 2 years prior to his birth. And there were times when, I'm sure like the Congresswoman here, I couldn't share that story. I couldn't share it in front of my son because every time I looked at him, it was a sobering reminder that I almost cost him his life. And I'm here to tell you, Congresswoman, that you've saved thousands of lives already just by stepping up and admitting the fact that, hey, I'm hurting, I've had hurt, and I've had loss. And that's what we want to do. I've been a part of teams. I played in the NFL for 10 years. I played on 3 different teams. And that's exactly what it was. It was a team. I played defense. And there were times when I could come off the field and rest. I can let the offense do their thing or the special teams do their part. And I think sometimes in life that people can't rest. They're constantly going. And I remember a game we played against the Dallas Cowboys. And I was sharing this earlier, that I was exhausted. I needed to come off the field in a bad way. And I tapped my helmet to the coach to say, hey, I need to get out of the field. I need to be replenished and refreshed and revived so I can get back into the game. Sometimes that's the way life is. We're tapping our head and say, I need a break. I need to rest. And we can't because either they're not listening to us, they're not paying attention, or nobody cares. And I just need to get out the game for a few minutes, and then we got back into the game, and yes, we beat the Dallas Cowboys. So I'm grateful to be a part of this game. It's going to take a team effort, just like it took a team effort for when I played in the NFL. There were people that I never knew. There were coaches. There were administrators. There were people who were helping us with Gatorade. There was the president. There was the owner. And so just like this team, Congresswoman, I'm here to be a part of this. And whatever role I can play, I'm grateful and I'm humbled. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Fred. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Seth Moulton, Representative Seth Moulton, who has led the effort to create a 3-digit national suicide prevention line. So Seth, come on up. Thank you.
Yeah, let me just start by sharing a quick story about why Susan's bill is so important. When I decided to tell my own story about dealing with post-traumatic stress, I met a lot of people. An awful lot of veterans and non-veterans alike have reached out and said that, sharing that story has given them the courage to share theirs. One was an amazing woman who has been coping with losing her daughter to suicide. And she told the story about how after she found her daughter dead in her apartment, she went into school, met with the benefits counselor because she's a teacher, and asked for some time off to get the mental health care that she needed because her daughter committed suicide. And the benefits representative for the school district looked at her and said, well, you don't qualify. She said, how on earth can I not qualify for some mental health care? My daughter just committed suicide. And the benefits person said, well, it didn't happen to you. No one needs to explain why that is so wrong, and yet that is the case today for so many Americans, and that's why this legislation is so incredibly important. I want to talk a little bit about my bill and bipartisan bill to make 988 the National Suicide Hotline. Suicide is now the 10th leading cause of death in America and the second leading cause of death for young Americans. It kills an average of 20 American veterans every single day. And even though veterans represent just 7% of the population, they are 1.5 times more likely to die from suicide than non-veterans. These aren't just statistics, they're the men and women that I served with. They're my friends, and we're losing too many of them. It's time to treat suicide like any other life-threatening emergency and break the stigma around mental health. And there's a lot that we have to do, but first we need to simply make it easier to get help. When your house is burning down in the middle of the night, you don't have to go find a phone book to look up the number to call. You just dial 911. Well, that should be exactly the same case if you wake up in the middle of the night with a mental health crisis, or you get a call from a friend who's on the verge of committing suicide and you need the help. In August, my colleague across the aisle, an Air Force veteran, Chris Stewart from Utah, and I introduced the National Suicide Hotline Designation Act to allow Americans experiencing a mental health emergency to dial just 3 digits, 988, to receive immediate help. We need to pass that now. In just a few weeks, we've gotten over 75 bipartisan co-sponsors. The legislation will save a lot of lives as soon as it's put into place. We also need to make mental health checkups a routine part of our culture. No one's afraid to say, hey, I've got to miss a few hours of work to go get an annual physical. People don't say, oh my God, what is wrong with you? Well, that should be exactly the same with checking in on your mental health as well and making sure that you're mentally strong. So I want to thank our bipartisan co-sponsors and countless organizations who support the bill, many of whom are here today. We've got to stand united in joining together with our neighbors, co-workers, family and friends across the country, and colleagues here in Congress to make progress on mental health, to end the stigma around getting help, and make sure that we save lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth Moulton. And now I'd like to introduce Representative Don Beyer from Virginia's 8th District. My colleague, Don, is the co-chair of the House Suicide Prevention Caucus. Thank you, Don.
Susan. Good morning. I'm so grateful to Susan Wild for inviting me to be with you today, and I want to offer my condolences again to you and commend you for taking this deep personal loss and turning it into a positive force for people across the country, maybe across the world. And we're here today, obviously, because September is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. And I'm sure you've heard again that's one of the leading causes of death across all age groups, and has risen 33% since 1999. I think it's actually risen in 49 out of 50 states since the turn of the century. In 2017 alone, we lost 47,173 people to suicide, and virtually every professional would tell you that is an underestimate, because often suicides are covered up and papered over because of the stigma. This is an epidemic. And obviously it doesn't just impact people that die by suicide, but everyone that loved them, everyone in their communities and their families. And in the times that we've been working on this, we realize it affects virtually every family. I talk about it in every speech I give, even fundraisers, and some inevitably people will come up to me afterwards to talk about how it affected their grandmother, their sister, their college roommate. As co-chair of the Bipartisan Suicide Prevention Task Force, we know that Congress has to do a lot more to protect these lives. And I'm really thankful that so many of our colleagues, Democratic and Republican, are coming together to work on bills to do this. Seth's bill with Chris Stewart will be a really important step forward. Because again, every time I give a speech, I say, who here knows the number of the suicide hotline? No hand goes up. When it's 988, every hand in the world should go up. One of the bills we introduced last week is the Barriers to Suicide Act, because we know that restricting access to lethal means allows time for a person to move out of crisis mode and seek help. Again, there are huge percentages of people who will only try one time in their lives. And if you can avoid that one time, you can save their life for the rest of the time. One such measure to do this is by installing physical barriers, like the nets on bridges. The Golden Gate Bridge is the best example. And any other attractive nuisance. Sometimes it's a parking garage, sometimes it's a telephone pole out in the middle of, wherever local and state officials see there's attractive nuisance that gives somebody a readily easy way to kill themselves. And our bill would make it the barriers to suicide. We give resources to state and local government to receive funding to deal with these suicide attractive issues, these barriers. So I'm really looking forward to working with my colleagues to pass this. Anything we can do to prevent suicide should be done. Bit by bit, we're moving the needle over. Thank you all for being here. Susan, thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, Don. Thank you so much, Don, for taking the time to be here. And now I'd like to introduce my friend, Pennsylvania State Representative Mike Schlossberg, who is from my district and has led this effort on the state level and has shared his own personal struggles to elevate this conversation. And I can tell you that in my district, his voice has been heard for a very long time on this issue. So it's my pleasure. Please come on up, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. And good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Schlossberg, and I have the honor of serving the people of Allentown and South Whitehall Township as Pennsylvania State Representative. I am 36 years old. For half my life, I have been diagnosed with a major depressive and generalized anxiety disorder. There have been moments in my life where the depression was so strong I haven't wanted to get out of bed. There have been times when I have been in the grips of a panic attack so powerful I couldn't move. And there have been moments where the pain was so great that all I wanted to do was end my life. I'm very lucky. Thanks to daily medication and therapy, I live in a state of recovery. I say these words without any shame. No one would be ashamed of discussing the Prilosec they take for their heartburn or the Lipitor they take for their cholesterol. No one should be embarrassed about saying that they are among the 1 in 5 Americans who actively suffers from some sort of mental illness. Like Congresswoman Wild, I have tried to use my experiences to destigmatize the issue of mental illness and suicide. In Pennsylvania, I worked with my colleagues to form the House Mental Health Caucus. From that work came Pennsylvania's College Suicide Prevention Act, a piece of legislation I sponsored last year that will hopefully serve as a forerunner to Congresswoman Wild's bill. However, our legislation was optional. So far, only one college opted in. It is clear that we need to do more. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for all college-age students. And according to a survey from the American Psychological Association, 18 to 25-year-olds are experiencing rates of depression and anxiety like never before. All of the mental health and suicide trends are moving in the wrong direction, and that trend is particularly acute among our youngest. These are individuals with the most potential. They are also among our most vulnerable. We must give them the tools that they need to lead a life in recovery. Congresswoman Wild's legislation would build on the important work done in many states, including our home of Pennsylvania. And it is my honor to lend my support to this important piece of legislation and say that I hope that Congress passes this bill as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike. And I'd like to now introduce Mr. John Madigan, the Senior Vice President and Chief Public Policy Officer for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. John?
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
So I'm going to keep this short and sweet. Susan and I both belong to a club that we did not want to join. I lost my sister Nancy 21 years ago, so I share her personal pain, and both of us are committed to professionally doing everything we can to make sure that other families don't go through what we do. And we think both of her bills are critically important, both for the college students and then for postvention, for families that are living with life after the loss of a loved one. So the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is committed to getting tens of thousands of our volunteers to urge their members of Congress to support your bill, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you
very
so much, John. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Chris Maxwell from the American Association of Suicidology, which I have to tell you, until this experience in my life, I never knew was even a word or a thing. So come Come on up, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning. The American Association of Suicidology, the nation's largest and oldest suicide prevention membership organization, is proud to support Representative Wild in her efforts to increase access to suicide prevention and mental health supports. Her leadership in addressing the public health issue of suicide at the scale and the level of attention that it deserves has the potential to save thousands of lives and to stop thousands of suicide attempts across this country. Furthermore, the work of Representative Wild and her colleagues will help to lower the prejudices and discrimination millions feel when attempting to seek support, allowing people to reach out before their pain ever becomes a suicidal crisis. The legislation introduced today also creates an unprecedented recognition of those impacted by suicide loss, both in terms of support and access to care. AAS applauds these wonderful Congresspeople, and we pledge our assistance in all ongoing large-scale and grassroots efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chris. And with that, we're going to adjourn the press conference. We are hosting a roundtable over in Cannon, directly across the street, 121 Cannon, immediately following this at 10 o'clock. And we're going to head over there. Rather than take questions, anybody who would like to can head over that way. And thank you all so much. And thank you to all of my colleagues here for being here.